And Kyle is going to talk to us about gender identity and pronouns and wants to explore his beliefs on that. Kyle, can you hear us?
Yes. Hi, this is Kyle.
Hey, Kyle, how's it going?
Great.
Okay, cool. Well, I have this thing here. You're saying you wanted to talk to us about gender pronouns and stuff. What's up with that?
Well, I was just watching something over on Mr. Atheist not too long ago, and I've been hearing a lot about the proposed pronouns for like thee and they and so on and so forth. Now, I'm a longtime atheist. I don't have any religious beliefs, but I don't really buy into a lot of this gender identity.
You don't buy into a lot of the gender identity, like pronouns and stuff, like people identifying as different pronouns?
Well, the way that I see it is really that people are different. I take people for who they are. I don't judge people. I don't really feel the need to put labels or invent labels to determine who a person is, if that makes sense. So I think the example that I used, being race, most people would look at me and say that I'm white, but I'm also a 64th Cherokee. So do I need to come up with a new label to identify me as not white, but something else?
So you're saying you're not... go on, Uncle Bart.
It seems like a preposterous idea.
Can I ask a question? I'm a 50-year-old guy. Can I ask what your demographic is, your age group?
I'm a few years older than you.
Right. So I think I would posit that part of this is generational for us, right? And I think as the arc of other people having the right to feel included in society as themselves curves very quickly, it is harder and harder for people in our age group, and certainly people older than us, the so-called greatest generation, boomers, etc. I think it's really hard to see society change that quickly, and I think that's just human nature. Personally, I come from a place where, I was a gay person, a gay kid that was stuck in an incredibly homophobic, violently homophobic environment, not only in my religious community, but in my house where I grew up, in my home. And so I had to hide who I was to stay alive. And, I'm a cisgendered, meaning I am happy with the sex I was assigned at birth. I'm a man, gay, white guy. And people don't always perceive me as a gay person when they first meet me. But it wasn't until my mid-20s that I was able to feel safe enough to speak the truth of who I was. So I have I have a lot of empathy and respect for people that are on whatever that journey is. So to me, I know it's a little strange for a lot of people, but for me, it would be like if you and I met and I said my name was Mark and you said, no, you're more of a Tom. Well, that just wouldn't make any sense, right? And it puts you in a position of deciding what I am and taking that away from me, which I think is, skeptics and non-religious people, whether we're a little right on the spectrum or left on the political spectrum, we wouldn't think of doing that, right?
Yeah, and I want to add on to this as well. I think, some people take this and yes, like Jordan Peterson and some other people think that if we're using these gender pronouns, we're somehow controlling people's speech and things like that. And I don't think that this is the case. I really think it's exactly like what Uncle Mark is saying. It's just trying to make people feel more comfortable with themselves and being open, and letting people know, hey, this is my experience. And this is how I identify with this experience of, being me and being life. And it would make me more comfortable if you acknowledge that as a point of interest, right? So, like, I mean, I don't always tell people that I'm an atheist, for example. I think that's kind of just a tidbit about me. I have a lot of other things going on in my life, but if I'm talking to somebody who was also ex-religious, for example, that label and the two of me and that other person are going to have a much deeper conversation because there's a connection there that you can't really have as someone who either never grew up religious or is still religious and never left. And so using that label for me as atheist is a label of accepting myself for who I am and letting other people know about my experiences, especially as an ex-religious person. So it totally makes sense to me why somebody would want to use these kinds of pronouns to help them navigate their experiences and give themselves kind of a sense of identity in the world, you know?
Maybe it's because I grew up in California. It's a very, very accepting environment. I even though I am older, I never really grew up with gay being a sin or anything along those lines. It's like I really never cared who's doing what with who as long as they're consenting. Mm-hmm. So, maybe somebody's experience in the Deep South is very different from mine. I'm not trying to assign pronouns to anybody. It's just very confusing to me. I mean, I have a hard time remembering somebody's name, let alone having to also memorize pronouns, and especially, a list of 30 pronouns or something along those lines.
I can see how it could be confusing. And I will say your intuition about what it's like in the South is pretty spot on. I think if, a couple of years ago, if I had told people what I'm doing right now, like having a show and having, a gay co-host and talking about atheism and stuff, I think I would be shunned and booed all the way from Dallas to Houston. But the world is becoming a little bit more open to these things now. And I will say that, like, I know you probably know a lot of people, probably a lot of transgender people. I don't think that you know enough people to where it's going to be hard enough to memorize a list for all of your friends and family. And I think that that's what really matters, right? The people who are in your lives the most, who you want to respect and you want to kind of validate them in some sense, I think if you really do have good relationships with them, to me, it seems like the most logical thing to do is to, be supportive in what they've decided to call themselves and what they have decided is best for them, what's best to label their experiences.
Yeah, and from my perspective, it's kind of the Thomas Jefferson quote that it neither breaks your leg nor picks your pocket, right? So it doesn't. And the other thing is, you don't actually have to use any of those pronouns. It's just how, if you want to respect the person who says to you, could you please refer to me as they or she or whatever? I get it's confusing. I am, struggling all the time to make sure I fully understand because I'm part of the queer spectrum. I'm always trying to make sure I'm understanding other people, under the rainbow flag. And so I have a lot of work to do there, but I'm determined that I'm going to do the best I can and respect people where they're at. And I honestly think you're not going to have you're never going to have to carry, pardon me, like a fish chart around with you with all the pronouns on it, right? Mm-hmm. The few times this will come up in your life, you can choose whether you want to respect that person's sense of themselves and how they want them to be known in the world, or you don't have to. I have a feeling if you're confronted with it, if you're already on our side of the fence as far as skepticism and atheism, you're going to probably pay the person the respect that they ask for, right?
I have not personally been presented with a situation, so I don't know that I would or not.
Right.
Again, I absolutely respect anybody's right to be, you be you. I'm fine. Right. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But then asking me to change my behavior and even my words
I think they can ask, and anybody can ask you to do a thing, but it's up to you whether you want to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Asking doesn't force the outcome.
True. And maybe
Right.
also being an atheist, I don't like being told what to do.
No, and nobody can tell you to do it. It's just a matter of how we all decide we're going to engage with each other's humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had a conversation kind of similar to this with somebody the other day. Like growing up as a teenager in Texas, I used the F word a lot, and I'm not talking about the F-U-C-K word. I'm talking about the other F word that has been used to describe gay people. And I had to eventually consciously make that choice to say, I am not going to use that word anymore. I will never call anybody that out of my own volition, because I understand that there's a baggage that comes with that word, and it's out of respect for the people that I love and care about who wouldn't want me to use that word, and in general don't want to see that word happen anymore. Am I controlling myself? Is there an outside force, like a social pressure, that's kind of convincing me to make that decision? Yes, absolutely. But there's also that idea of I want to love and respect the people that are closest to me in my life. And I know that there's a person in my mind that comes to mind if I say that word where that would offend. And to me, that gives me more of an impetus to kind of catch myself when I'm using these words. So you mentioned that you don't have anybody in your life maybe where this is the case. I think maybe, and I'm just speculating here, but I think maybe if you knew someone personally in your life who you deeply cared about and they asked you to do this for them, I think you might be able to understand why this would be important.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, and I just want to kind of differentiate between, and I'm a gay person, so I'm going to say it, the difference between using the word fag, which is a provocative pejorative, right? Mm-hmm. Which is nasty and terrible. And when you're using a pejorative, you have to examine your relationship to that word, right? But this is a little bit different. This isn't pointing to a stranger and saying you're a fag. This is somebody who's letting you know that, hey, this is the journey I'm on. Recognizing my full humanity is part of that. This is my name. This is my pronoun. I think that's different. I think that's someone asking you to be cool with them, and you can choose whether or not you want to be. Whereas if you use a pejorative like fag or the N-word or something, that's ugly in a really different way. But there is a similarity there about how we all police ourselves a little bit, right? If we want to be decent human beings and not, be chased off to live in the forest for the rest of our lives. We all don't say certain things to people. This is just kind of the inverse of that. It's deciding whether we're going to respect people where they're at, and I'm down with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm absolutely not. I don't use any terms in a derogatory, pejorative sense.
Sure.
And I think people are, well, am I really going to be causing harm if I call somebody who appears male he or him? I mean, even if they feel like...
Yes, I would say yes.
Only if you're doing it after they've let you know what they would like to be known as.
Yeah.
Right. It's completely common and completely human to not, when you're meeting someone for the first time, or maybe their gender is not totally apparent to you, maybe they're androgynous or whatever, and you use the wrong pronoun. And if they correct you, then first of all, you're off the hook for getting it wrong the first time. Mm-hmm. Trans people, believe me, genderqueer people have an incredible well of patience for this.
I was going to mention that,
because this has happened to them their entire lives. Mm-hmm. But if you continue to misgender them, mm-hmm. or what's called dead naming, if you use the name of the person they were before they began their journey, that's pretty shitty. Mm-hmm. And as a skeptic and an atheist, I think you should be fully aware of how shitty that is.
Yes. And gender dysphoria is a real phenomenon, a real psychological phenomenon that happens to people. And that can be triggered when you're using people by a pronoun that they don't prefer to be called by. And I would consider anybody who deliberately uses a pronoun against somebody who they've explicitly asked not to be called harassment in all forms. Because that can definitely cause harm.
That becomes a pejorative, right? It's basically saying, it's the equivalent of saying fag if someone says, I'm sorry, could you refer to me as she rather than he? And if you don't respect that, then in my opinion, in my experience with, part of our show is we have these amazing listeners, and I get so much feedback from all the segments we do. And I've gotten a tremendous amount of feedback from the trans community. And from people I know personally, and then listeners who tell me this kind of thing, that dead naming and misgendering is incredibly cruel to them. So again, you're off the hook if you didn't know and you just made an honest mistake, no problem. But once you now have that knowledge, it's up to you how you want to act on it. But the humanist perspective, I think it requires you to respect that.
Yes.
The few times it's going to happen for you, and it's not going to happen every day, right?
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Does that answer kind of your questions on why we feel the way we do about this issue, Kyle?
No, I sort of understand why people feel that way, and maybe it's, again, different. Maybe it's a generational thing. To me, that seems extremely sensitive, maybe to an extreme, but that may be, a different environment that I grew up in, a different generation. But
and if I can jump in on that, and again, I'm 50, so we're probably pretty close in age. It's not that individuals are getting more sensitive. It's that society is getting less shitty and callous. Right, with a few exceptions, like what's happening in the White House, we are.
Yeah, it seems like they're getting more.
These people have always existed. There have always been trans people. There have always been genderqueer people. There have always been asexual people. There's always been gay people. When someone, an older person says, "Well, I never knew a gay person," you absolutely did. They just their life depended on you on society not knowing they were gay.
Yeah,
it's 4 times that for trans people, right? So we're just, and I credit our millennial generation. I'm Gen X, obviously we're the best generation, but I credit our millennial friends for pushing this in a direction where we're being less callous and thoughtless to vulnerable people. And sure, it's sensitive, but what's wrong with being sensitive?
Interesting point to leave on. Well, Kyle, I love that you called about this topic. I think it's an important topic. I think we do have to move on to some of our other callers. But if you want to talk about this more, I'm sure the atheist community of Austin's Discord server has some people on there who would totally chat with you about this more. Does that sound good, Kyle?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. You've given me something to think about.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So glad that you called. I hope you have a great day.
Take care.
You too.
Yeah, really fun stuff. We've talked a little bit about trans issues and gay rights issues on Truth Wanted. We haven't gone that in depth on trans issues and the pronouns thing. I'm so glad that you feel the same way that I do, Mark, that it's just a level of respect thing for me now. I was on the same boat as Kyle, where it was really hard for me to understand at first. But I also know that I grew up very privileged in some sense. I'm a straight white dude. Came from a middle-class background, and that's going to shield me from a lot of these experiences that trans people have had with dealing with gender dysphoria and all kinds of the other things that happen. And so I can understand why they would want their experiences and their identity to be respected in that way. And I don't see it as that big of an extreme.
I don't either. I don't either at all. I think it's literally like if I tell you what my name is and then you decide to call me by something else, I'm like, well, that guy's a fucking crazy person. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Just and listen, the person's humanity is not predicated on your ability or inability to understand it.
Yes. Absolutely. Right? Yeah.
And if you don't understand it, educate yourself.